With all of the injustices and traumas that are happening around the world as we speak, whether you're looking overseas in the Middle East, we're seeing right here on American soil the injustices within, police brutality and racial injustice. There are so many issues that every single one of us are seeing, witnessing, experiencing. Why in the world should anyone really care about the reuse movement over or more as a higher priority than these other things that are happening and to other human beings? I think that's a question that I ask myself all the time, and my gut kind of reaction to that is the simple fact that the planet itself is our spaceship. It's pushing us through this, crazy universe, and we're here destroying our own life support system. And so without that support system being intact, none of the other issues matter, because most of them are actually rooted in environmental injustice. And I think that if we can reconnect people back to the planet, back to Earth, back to nature, and see the importance of shifting out of this mode of extraction and wasteful practices, I think that reconnection will invigorate the movement even more. And so for me, that's what motivates me. So it's always about getting people outside, going into spaces where we don't see a lot of other humans, and giving that the next generation, especially, exposure to these beautiful spaces that still exist. And we can continue to protect them and then expand that beyond through our behaviors, through the things that we consume, and paying more attention to not just other human beings, but every living thing on the planet. But that's just my 2 cents. Ben, I'd love to hear from you. What are your thoughts on that question?
It's a big question. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a yes and. We don't have no one issue is more important than another issue. If it's important to you and it's something that you're willing to like put your life and center it around, then like all the power to you. Super stoked. This doesn't mean that you can only do one thing in life. You can do a ton of different things. You can care about a lot of different things. You know, if we look at Afghanistan, I have no experience there, so I can't do anything about it. If we look at incarceration, it's a topic that I'm not very close to, and so I think we all have different conversations that we can have when we can have them. The topic of consumption is one that I think is really accessible to all. And I think there are so many people in the world that are actually lacking purpose as opposed to the opposite. I don't think the average person has an abundance of purpose and they're like, oh my gosh, there are so many things I care so much about, I can't pick. Actually, it's usually the opposite that's true. People come up with a feeling of apathy because they feel overwhelmed and they're like, oh, I'm not going to do anything because the world's so screwed up anyways. And I think that's the worst thing that can possibly happen. So as long as you're taking some action, as long as you're looking at something and saying, I care about this, all these issues are interconnected. So one day you're going to start caring about the reuse movement if you care about social justice. One day you're going to come back here if you care about poverty. It's all interconnected. Because we can't live life as simple binary beings, right? We're layered, we're complex, and we touch upon so many things as we go through life. So yes, and not either or.
Yes, and amen to that. Liz, what about you?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because it's something that I actually have to do on a regular basis, which is, I'm a journalist. There are a lot of issues in the world right now. And part of my job is to make the argument or make the case that sustainability and disposable culture is problematic and it's hard. And I think that part of the way that I do that is that, these individual actions, right? The paper cup that we're taking, the takeout that we're eating, it all seems so minute, right, on its own. But when you look at the statistics about how much we're creating and how this is supporting the oil industry and how much of this is ending up in the oceans and how much of that is turning into microplastics that are poisoning sea animals and that are ultimately poisoning us. When you start looking at the scale of the problem, I think that suddenly takes something that seems very small and inconsequential and makes it seem, much more powerful, right? Because it's a terrible thing that is destroying the planet, as you mentioned. But I think the other thing that really angers me is when I just, when we've talked about the history of how we got here. And so much of this is really about big corporations that have made a lot of money from destroying the planet, right? And who is most harmed when we destroy the planet? It's communities that can't really afford to deal with these kinds of issues, right? It's the people who can't afford to buy, higher end fish, right, or that's farmed in a particular way, or organic food, right? It's people whose lives are already hard and are going to be made harder because of the decisions that really were not made by individuals, but were made by corporations trying to make a lot of money. And so really, I think that when you look at the scale of the problem, it begins to approximate some of the other issues that you're talking about. And I also think that in terms of social justice, which is some of the issues that you were talking about, this issue really drives me and angers me because it is a social justice issue. And the villains are out there, and we know who they are. They're these big corporations, they're wealthy nations, really, when you think about it at a global scale, that have created this kind of economy, and poor people both here in this country and around the world are suffering as a result of our choices, which are so stupid, right? It's like, I have to have this throwaway cup, I have to have this throwaway spoon, right? Like when you think about the impact of that at a global scale, it's truly horrifying. So that's the argument that I would make. It's an argument that I have to make day after day because I am writing these stories, next to other journalists who are writing about Afghanistan and about these other issues. But I truly believe that this is something that is on par with that, really, when we think about it, in its full, global, form.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Liz. Well said. Yes. Bridget, what are your thoughts?
So a couple things. One is, if you have an issue that moves you to act, to Ben's point, go after that. Like, these are all, this is not more or less important. You can't put you can't put in order which issue comes first, second, or third. They're all equally critical. And so that's just like the reality of living in a complex world. But Danni, your point about, if we don't solve this issue, all the other issues become moot. And so it's so amazing to me that we have the space of environmental justice, which wasn't a term that existed, just several years ago. There was social justice, and then there was the environment, and they were two separate issues. And it was really hard to have a conversation. It was all about polar bears somewhere very far away. And it was very hard to have a conversation about how this impacted the communities that you lived in, and people didn't really buy that. And it's become very visible in the last, couple of years, unfortunately, just how true that is. So all of the things, Liz, that you mentioned, like, those are very visceral issues now. And so I guess I'll finish just by saying to Ben's final point around, it doesn't have to be either or. You can go spend all of your emotional energy working on the issue you care most about, and then you can just like bring your reusable mug as like a daily habit and behavior. And when you see a cool solution in the store, go use it, so that the big companies see that market signal and want to serve you. Like, use the better experiences that are out there.
I love that. Yeah, it's like picking the thing that you care about most over everything, and then figuring out which gifts and talents and skill sets you have personally that can be applied to that, and just go full throttle with it. I mean, it's daunting at first, and it's scary because of the society that we live in. We're taught the opposite idea, but it now more than ever is the moment. This is the moment for people to do that and to step into their own purpose and power. And once we do that, I think the world will be an even more beautiful place, because we'll see people living 100% centered in what they're supposed to be doing here. Because we're all a part of this ecosystem. We're all a part of this body of society that we're just here to serve each other. At least that's how I see it. I think we're here to serve each other, love one another, love the planet. I know it's very like probably a little woo-woo or grassroots, but that is truly my heart part. That's what I feel. And if we just need more ushers to step up and not be afraid to say that. But Matt, I'd love to round it out with your thoughts on this as well.
It's an interesting question, especially today, because my daughter just started high school today, and my son turned 21 just recently, and I can remember, being their age, and I can remember all the things that I was passionate about, all the issues that I cared about and wanted to work on, and I thought I'm 44 now that all this time in the future we would have made a lot more progress than we have. And I don't say that to be a downer, but I say that to, I would have thought, oh, we're going to solve climate change, and now we're going to have room to, to solve some of these other seemingly intractable problems that we're encountering in this country and around the world. And of course, back then I wouldn't have been able to predict, the impact of social media on the polarization of politics here in this country and around the world. And there's all these things that have happened, over the last 20 years. That have gotten us to to where we are today. I think that for me, what makes this issue important is that when you look at the kind of root of a lot of these problems that we're encountering, from environmental issues to racial justice issues to political issues, a lot of it actually is rooted in this broken kind of take, make, waste economic system that we've been stuck in for quite some time. And, if you look at, the wars that have been fought over the last 100 years, it's usually about two things. It's about ideology, or it's about natural resources. And so, the continued kind of one-way throwaway economy mindset, which is basically just churning materials and natural resources from the planet, and that is not helping us solve these problems, and it's disproportionately impacting poor people and people of color around the world. If we can start to fix that system, if we can start to build something that is more human and more beautiful and more resilient in its place, I think we're going to start to see a lot of these other issues also being solved through that process. Because it's not just about saving trees or protecting sea turtles. It's really about, like, how do we create an economy that works for everybody. And so I think that for me, that's where this reuse piece comes in, because we have to do that. Just like you were saying, Danny, about Spaceship Earth. We have to do that. We have to be able to live sustainably on this planet so that we have time to solve all these other problems that we've got going on.